Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini. Let's continue with Saint Ignatius of Antioch. He was the third successor to St. Peter in Antioch. Let's pick up where we left off. So in his letters to the Bishop of Smyrna, we were looking at that. He says to him, "Stand firm as an anvil that is hammered." The anvil is what the blacksmiths use, right? To pound horseshoes, to pound metal, pound out red-hot pieces of metal into nails and so forth. It is the mark of a great athlete to be wounded and still to conquer. Isn't that wonderful? So there's quite a funny video comparing, I don't mean to offend anybody here, but you just have to face the truth. It's a video showing soccer versus hockey. and you have to laugh because it's true. The soccer players, they get a little nudge and then they dive, they crawl on the ground like they're dying in pain. And they make such a show. And they show a few clips of that. You know.
Did you ever see the one where the one soccer player goes up to the other one and just kind of flicks his ear and he goes and
Yeah. So, and then it says versus hockey, and it shows guys being pounded to the boards and getting right back up and skating. Hockey players being, knocked down, shot with pucks, and they just keep skating. And then it shows one player got, I think it was a puck or a high sticking, cut his brow, right above his brow. He had a deep cut and his blood all over. And he goes off to the locker room. He gets all bandaged up. He comes out back onto the game in the third period, scores the winning goal. Now that's hockey. That is hockey. So the comparison is, it's a glorious thing for an athlete to get beat up, bloody, bruised, and still keep going. That's virtue. That's virtue. Boxers do that each time they try to get back up. Wrestlers too. So there is good things to sports. There are good things to sports. As Integrity magazine used to say under Ed Willock in the 1940s and 50s, sports are good for helping form men out of boys. But in the modern world, when over-adulated, they tend to make boys out of men. So sports are good to help make men out of boys, but when way overdone, it turns men into boys. And wives get very frustrated with this when they expect their husband to be leading the prayers, looking over the children's schoolwork during the day, and make big decisions, and spend time with the family and the wife. And it's very frustrating for good wives when their husband's off playing video games, sport video, like fantasy football and stuff like that, when he should be growing up and put these things away. Put these childish things away, says St. Paul, and focus on man's duties. How much good a father does when he spends time with his children, works with his children. It's common sense that a father has to he's got to spend 20 hours at work and come home and 21 hours, another couple hours with his children. Yeah, it's the way it is. And to play hockey with them, to cut wood with them, to load the wood furnace and the wood barn with them, to shovel the snow with them, to look over their homework, help them in their math, sit with them, play with them, talk to them. This is important in fatherhood, but this is what's dreadfully lacking in the modern world, the absence of fathers. And it's a scourge. So here This is a wonderful point from St. Ignatius of Antioch. It is the mark of a great athlete to be wounded and still to conquer, to not be hindered by pain and blood even. Do not despise servants and the handmaids. Avoid evil artifices, that is, avoid evil deception. Please him for whom you fight and from whom you receive your pay. Avoid evil artifices. I guess that would also include, for priests, don't say the new Mass. Even if you're ordered to, you have to disobey. You can't save your pension and your position and your rank and say the new Mass or participate in it. Avoid evil artifices, deceptions. That's an example. Please him for whom you fight and from whom you receive your reward. Let your baptism remain as your arms. Your baptism is your weapons. Your faith as your helmet. Your love as your spear. Your patience as your whole armor. After this paraphrase of St. Paul, St. Ignatius asked Bishop Polycarp to assemble a council at his church at Antioch and to have a good and zealous successor elected when he should perish in the arena at the Colosseum in Rome. It's a great thing, isn't it? He's telling his friend Bishop, hold a meeting and make sure there's a good bishop to succeed me. He added some salutations to various friends in Smyrna. Say hello to the wife of Eutropius, my dear Attalus, and Ali, a name very dear to me. Fare you well in the Lord. Signed, Ignatius, Bishop Ignatius of Antioch. These were the last recorded words of St. Ignatius after dispatching the letters. He and his guards sailed across the Aegean Sea, cruising among the isles of Greece of lovely names and fragrant memory, and landing finally in Neapolis in Italy. Proceeded thence on foot across Macedonia and Epirus to the port of Apidomnos in Dalmatia. There they embarked again and traversed the Adriatic Sea. After passing Rhegium and Puteoli, they ran afoul of a stiff wind which blew them ashore at Ostia, at the mouth of the Tiber River. Weary and footsore, the old bishop was dragging along the last 16 miles of the long journey from Ostia to Rome. Hurry! There was no time to be lost. He must be shown to the people during the Saturnalia, which were especially observed that year in celebration of Trajan's victory over the Dacians. So he has a deadline to meet. So move along, old man. And he's worn out. He must be tired. He must have had aching bones. It was December 20th, the very last day of the gladiatorial games, when Ignatius, trudging along the Via Ostiensis, saw the glare of the winter sun whiten the magnificent marble monuments with which the emperors had adorned the capital of the world. Hurry, hurry! The decayed and slavish population was at that very moment packed in the various amphitheaters, their nostrils dilated by the smell of the blood, sicklied over with perfumes squirted on them from time to time. And they must not be cheated of the pleasure of seeing a distinguished visitor from Syria gobbled up by the lions. So that was on the advertisements. Come and see an old bishop of a fanatic church gobbled up by the lions. Come and see this. Popcorn on sale, Budweiser beer being half price. Messengers, no doubt, had gone ahead with instructions, and certain ferocious beasts were being kept hungry. in the lower chambers of the amphitheater. The Colosseum had a floor, right? But under this floor were steps leading up to an open, like coming out of these basements in the New England, these outdoor outlets, exits to the outside, and you open the lid and you walk out, right? That's what it was like. Though not so hungry as the human beasts who howled and shrieked from marble benches for a viler and madder stimulation of jaded nerves and sick souls. Sick souls who were excited to watch bloodshed and massacre. Today it's not different, except, the abortion clinics, it's all done, with a smile and needles, and it's all clean and sanitary. But we're back to bloodshed. And, movies are violent now, and video games, I hear, can be extremely violent, right? Is that true? But why was this crowd coming forth so quietly from the Porta Ostienses? And what did they want? For they seemed to move purposely as one man. And as they drew near, the sun glowing on their faces, it was evident that they were brethren coming to greet the martyr. Among them, in fact, were many of his own flock from Antioch, who, setting out when he did by a more direct route, had reached Babylon, modern Rome, before him. Even the 10 guards must have been touched to see them on their knees around him while he raised his hand in a last blessing and spoke briefly in a firm voice, begging them not to do anything to obtain his release, for this, as he had feared, was their purpose. So you have to bet there had to be among some of the young men, at least, you go, let's rescue him. Let's rescue the bishop. Let's have a plan. I'm sure some of them did that, right? Because they're noble of heart. They want to help the bishop. But he told them, please don't rob me of my crown. Then kneeling among them, he prayed for the church, that it might grow and fill the earth. For the end of the persecution also he prayed, and as always, for the unity and brotherly love of all Catholics. The guards dispersed the crowd and elbowed their way through it. With St. Ignatius in their midst, they hastened under the gate to the east towards the intersection of the Via Ostiensis and the Via Appia, hard by the Circus Maximus. There Ignatius was turned over to the prefect of the city, and by him dispatched in haste under another guard to the amphitheater where he was expected. Why this should have been the Flavian, which we call the Colosseum, rather than the Circus Maximus, or one of the various other theaters of daily butchery, does not appear. But Christian tradition has it so, despite the absence of historical proof that any Christian martyr ever suffered there. All that can be said is there was one great ellipse, E-L-L-I-P-S-E, in that evil city, where all day the mob had howled, the Christians to the lions, the Christians to the lions. And all day the little bands of men, women, and children kneeling together in the center of the bloody sand had cried, Pro Christo, until one tired voice after another had been silenced. For Christ, as they were each chewed up by the lions. Perhaps Trajan himself sat on the podium, surrounded by senators, Vestal virgins, and various notables. Perhaps now he even found a sardonic pleasure in seeing a white-haired visionary who had once defied him to his face, led into the empty arena at that heavy moment of the afternoon where boredom began to drift across the rows of dark, distorted faces. And as great awnings were shifted to meet the changing rays of the sun. Some choicer spectacle, some bloody little surprise was usually offered. There at last, among the scattered bones and still quivering entrails of those who had just gone before him, stood the Bishop St. Ignatius, the Christ-bearer, the wheat of God, ready to be ground. At a signal, the cuniculus was opened, and two huge lions with shaggy, tawny heads, raised to sniff the tainted air, came alertly into the arena. So the crowds are shouting. And there St. Ignatius is praying. Powerful scene, isn't it? That's what a bishop has to be. This is what bishops need to be. May God give bishops like this back to his church. I am the wheat of God, and by the teeth and wild beasts of lions I am ground, that I may become the pure bread of Christ. He had written this to his brethren of Rome. Even his wish had no part of his body, even his wish that no part of his body be left to bury was granted. In that swift, blinding moment of pain, when the hungry beasts pounced on him, tore him limb from bleeding limb, and then proceeded while the crowd sat silenced with horrified fascination, to devour not only all his flesh, but even his sinews, entrails, and smaller bones, until, according to the oldest tradition of later date, nothing was left but two large bones. Whatever remained of the gallant soldier of Christ was gathered up in a basket. Some courageous Christian then took possession of it, how we do not know, and undertook to return it to the church of Antioch. The news of the sacrifice of St. Ignatius had meanwhile sped by the grapevine towards the east. At each city the Christians came forth to receive the precious relics and to carry them on their shoulders to the next place, until at last they reposed in a chest before the altar where the saint had preached and offered the infinite sacrifice of the Holy Eucharist. St. Jerome saw them in the 4th century and believed them genuine. St. John Chrysostom, while a priest at Antioch, delivered a memorable panegyric on the martyr, in which he congratulated the people on having his bones among them to venerate, saying, "You lent him for a season, but you received him back with usury," he said. "You sent him forth a bishop, you recovered him a martyr." Just before Antioch fell into the hands of the Saracens in the year 637, the remains were taken to the church of St. Clement in Rome. So they're there now. When you go to St. Clement Basilica, which has several layers of churches that were built over each other, it's one of the oldest Catholic churches in the world. And it's on the same street as the gladiatorial locker rooms used to be. The locker rooms for the gladiators were on that street. And then they would go to the Colosseum for the gladiatorial games. But it was on that street. You would have seen gladiators sharpening their swords or training or talking about who knows what, their wives at home and their families when they were kidnapped and sold into slavery. When St. Ignatius died in the year 107 or thereabouts, the Catholic Church still seemed to most persons in the Roman world a handful of fanatical and perverse people who had strange customs which made them quite different from others and who refused to do their patriotic duty of worshiping the emperor. So they were considered unpatriotic. And strange customs like eating someone's flesh and drinking their blood, well, that was the Mass. Those who knew about them probably felt sure that they would be exterminated or would give up the hopeless struggle against the vast majority of unbelievers. Countless other thousands lived and died without even knowing of their existence. But St. Ignatius knew that in the secret judgment halls of history, the promise of his Lord had already been accomplished. Have confidence, I have overcome the world. Christ ruled from the cross. He ruled from the grave. He ruled from the heights of heaven, even over those who could not see, through the mists of corruption of ignorance, that he was King of the world. And that closes the chapter on St. Ignatius of Antioch. So how beautiful. Yes, how many Catholics maybe in that time, I'm sure many Catholics gave up. Our bishops are being delivered to death. What do? We don't have a bishop anymore. The priests are being arrested. We have to have Mass in dark tunnels underground called the catacombs. Mom and Dad, I can't take this anymore. I want to have a good life. I want to have a big job. I'm not going to be part of this sect anymore. And how many might have seen their young men, young ladies, wanting to join the world, burn incense to the gods of Rome, burn incense to the emperor, and get good jobs, make it well in the world, but probably went to hell if they didn't convert. I'm sure it happens, because it's happening today. How many traditional families you lose some young ones to the world. They want the world. Mass in some basement, Mass in some hotel room. That's tough to go through. But it's been going on since the end of Vatican II. And how many young people, my friends go to Mass in a real church at least, and we are going to Mass in some basement of someone's house. And when people want to ask me in college or university, so where do you go to Mass? What religion are you? Well, I'm Catholic. So where do you go to Mass? Well, I go to Mass in a hotel room once every 2 months. If that. Wait a minute. You're Catholic and you go to Mass in a hotel? What are you talking about? Don't you have a church down the street? Well, you see, that's Novus Ordo, and we're traditional. And some people hate that stigma. They hate that persecution. So they get tired of it. So I've seen it all my priesthood. All my priesthood. Young people who think it's cooler to be with the world. And they go with Indult, or they go with St. Peter's, or they go with now the new SSPX, sad to say, because it's not applauded by the world. But our Lord blesses those who suffer persecution for his sake. He blesses them. So, and we really have no excuse, Why? Because we have history in front of us. We have this story of St. Ignatius, which is powerful. And here was a bishop led to the slaughter. And we have the persecution of the French Revolution. Catholics going to Mass in the forests at night. In a barn like St. John Vianney's family. Many in the Vendée. They were slaughtered. It was a genuine genocide of the Vendéans. Because they stayed Catholic. Traditional Catholic. And then in England, look at that wonderful history. Over 200 years of persecution. Mass in basements, Mass in living rooms. Father Gerard Horgan, he told me, who's in the old priest home in Phoenix, so pray for him, he's a very good priest. Father Gerard Hogan told me that, because he was in England, I've repeated this several times, but it's worth hearing again. In England, when they were renovating some building, they cracked open some wall, and behind the wall they found a skeleton of a priest in vestments. He was sitting on the ground with a ciborium in his hand. And the workers were like, what's a skeleton with priest vestments doing here? Well, they ended up calling the local bishop. The bishop came and took the ciborium out of the hands and discovered the consecrated hosts were still intact after the 1500s. They were still incorrupt. But the conclusion was most likely the priest was saying Mass. Protestant police raided the house. They quickly hid the priest in a hiding hole. And most likely in that case, the family was arrested and taken out. And then the house sold to some Protestant. And meanwhile, that priest was waiting and waiting and waiting for someone to open from the outside the hiding hole. No one ever came. So the priest probably took one communion a day until he starved to death and died with the consecrated host in his hand, died with his vestments on. And that's how they found him 500 years later. Quite impressive, isn't it? And still today, they bump into hiding holes that were for priests. They still find, recently they found some vestments. They found an old tattered missal. They find things like that once in a while when they renovate these old homes. So look at the Catholics even in Ireland. In Ireland, you couldn't go into politics if you were Catholic. You couldn't have a high status job in Ireland. The Catholics, their farms were heavily taxed, more than anybody else. So I'm sure there were young Irish Catholics who said, look, I'm not taking this anymore, and went with the Protestant religion. And they made it well in this life, but how did they die? You hope they converted back before they died. But so, what we're living through is not even close to what our ancestors went through. We're not being hunted down yet. We're still free to fly and say Mass everywhere. But those days will come when we are hunted again. And, imagine being hunted down by those artificial intelligence dogs. There are ways to defeat them, but it's difficult, I understand. Okay, so any questions about St. Ignatius of Antioch or anything about that chapter? So what'd you think of this old bishop?
It was quite impressive.
Yeah.
Quite impressive martyr.
Yeah?
Was he the second bishop of Antioch? He was right under St. Peter, correct? Third.
Yes, but he would have probably been consecrated by St. Peter. We don't know, but most likely. And what do you think was going through his mind when he was telling people, don't take my crown away, don't stop my martyrdom? What do you think he was thinking for the future of the Catholic Church on earth?
He was leading by example.
Yes.
Also, they kind of valued it as more merit in heaven.
Right. He probably thought, which is true, he could do more for the church from heaven than on earth. And then no doubt he was thinking of Tertullian's words. What? Sanguis martyrum semen Christianorum.
Blood of the martyrs is a seed.
Sanguis martyrum semen Christianorum.
Seed of Christians.
Yes. The blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians. So the rest of the quote the beginning of the quote begins, "Go ahead, mow us down. Cut us down like wheat. Because the more you kill us, the more we grow. Because the blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians." Tertullian. Go ahead, chop us down. Go ahead, imprison us. Go ahead, shoot us all, hang us all, decapitate all of us, put us all through the guillotine. Go ahead. The more you kill us, the more we grow. The blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians. Wonderful truth. And that's only true of the Catholic faith. Every other false religion, they get chopped up and finished, they're done. There's only a handful of Shakers left in the world, and they're just 25 minutes away, and they're dying too. Shakers that now bought the La Salette shrine property and the old seminary. For what? A foolish nonsense religion. The Shakers. Shakers. All right, let's move on to the next powerful saint. Saint Justin the philosopher. Saint Justin the philosopher. Why is he important? Because philosophy is important. Philosophy is the foundation of theology. Philosophy is the handmaid of theology. The philosophy is the diving board for theology. Philosophy is the foundation for the building of the mansion, the beautiful mansion of theology. To have a beautiful statue, you need a good foundation and a base to put it on. That foundation and base is sound philosophy. So that's why St. Justin is important. So let's look at his life. A man traveling in Samaria at the beginning of the 2nd century must of necessity have arrived sooner or later at the place where all the great Roman roads intersected, at Jacob's well. That same well of Sychar, where our Lord Jesus Christ, only 70 years previously, 70 years previously, had offered the Samaritan woman the living water of truth. St. John chapter, anyone remember? We're missing Guadalupe and Andres. They had to fly home for the funeral of their great-grandfather, so pray for him.
Chapter 16?
No, that's the Last Supper. 11 is the rising of Lazarus. 9 is the curing of the blind man. 8 is his confrontation with the synagogue. 4, chapter 4. 6 is the famous one of the
bread of life discourse.
Yeah, the bread of life, the Holy Eucharist, yes. So isn't that tremendous? 70 years. So Saint Justin is about 70 years after Christ. Walking west, he would presently have seen opening before him the olive-clad valley between Mount Gerizim to the south and Mount Ebal to the north, and there on a slope some distance below the city of Samaria, he would have seen the white walls and tiled roofs of the town of Flavia Neapolis, now the town of Nablus, Nablus, Nablus. The ancient Sichem or Sechem, which Vespasian had renamed when he adorned it and gave it the privileges of the empire. Somewhere in that drowsy, luxurious city, there was a prosperous villa owned by one Priscus, who with his father Bacchius, had been sent there with other Greek colonists by Titus, about the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. So we'll read on with St. Justin. next time. Priscus is the father of Saint Justin. Adjutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.